Recording in progress. That's the cue that the webinar has officially started. Welcome everyone to the next event in DevOn's AI Advantage series. Thanks so much for joining us today on Thursday, 14th of March. We are delighted to have with us Stefania Bonà from Trustly. That's actually not quite your correct job title on the screen there. Congratulations. You're now head of AI products, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Good.
Thank you.
And what we wanted to do in this event was put the spotlight on one individual. So thank you, Steph, for volunteering to be that individual. And you have more experience than really almost anyone I know in bringing together the worlds of product and AI and or machine learning, and we can get into the debate on what those things mean. So yeah, delighted to hear about your journey today. And when we were talking about how you would present your story, I think we both came to the conclusion, no better way than for you to narrate how you got started and go through the different places that you worked and help us understand the different things you learned about managing AI-centric machine learning powered products along the way. So I'll hand over to you in a second. For the audience out there, ask questions, keep them coming. We're devoting even more time in this hour event to your questions. So we are relying on you out there to send in some good questions. And we'll be joined after Stefania's presentation by my colleague Tomasz from DevOn. And we'll have a rich conversation about all things AI and product. Stefania, can you ask me one thing before you begin? What is product?
That's a very good question, and I actually recently talked about it at my university when I did my BA in Milan. And to me, product, if you just strip away any fancy definition, is as simple as building software. And data products, I mean, I'm looking forward to the question. It's sometimes very much more back-end related than classical product management that has a huge front-end component. Mm-hmm. But again, we can go into that. So my definition is building software.
Great. I was once asked that question, what is product? 3 words in a job interview, and I failed the question miserably. I didn't get the job. I probably should have just given an easy answer, a simple answer like you did. So we'll leave it to you to tell us kind of how you got into this and a bit of your journey. Audience out there, as you see these logos, as you hear what Steph has to say, send your questions and we'll get to the Q&A soon.
Awesome. And yeah, feel free to just also jump in, Shaun, as I.
Okay, yeah. If we come up with something along the way with particular, I'll jump in as well. Perfect. Over to you. We'll let you share your screen.
All right, here we are. So I usually don't really like talking about myself, but I think in this case, like Shaun said, it kind of makes sense. So hopefully this is just as simple as a starting point to then ask me as many questions as you like throughout our conversation. So where did I start? I started my journey now almost 11 years ago at Amazon. And I held various roles at Amazon, but the most relevant ones, of course, are my three and a half years that I spent in product management. As you had a look maybe on my LinkedIn, my career has always been in the financial sector, in fintech and big tech, and building products for risk. So what I was doing at Amazon was building products for risk within the gift card space, gift card payments that at the time, actually, by the time I left, the business reached around $1 billion in revenue. So the funny thing about Amazon is that I did not realize first that I was working in the first department within Amazon that used machine learning around 20 years ago. And then I realized when I left that I was working for one of the biggest companies in the world that can do machine learning at scale. There are not many out there that have the capabilities that Amazon has. The other ones are the FANGs and Microsoft. And I kind of realized it the hard way when I left. The reason being is that when I had to build my products for risk management within gift cards, I had an idea, I created my metrics from scratch, I started from the rules-based system, but once that idea was born, I could then hand over the development to a very specialized machine learning engineering team, and the time from an idea to an actual product being used in production was relatively quick. And at Amazon, pretty much these days, every product team has a dedicated machine learning engineering team. So there were other challenges which were around stakeholder management, shared resources, because I was not the only PM within gift cards, but kind of easy, let's say, going from an idea to an actual product. And yeah, so the reality that I faced actually was when I joined Checkout.com. So I was brought into Checkout.com to build their first risk product for managing payments risk. So Checkout.com is a payment service provider, so they process payments on behalf of their merchants. And my role was to build a fraud product to also be aligned with competition. So when I joined, it was, and that's when I'm saying I faced the actual reality. I had to build this product from scratch. And we were 3 people, maybe 4, I think, at the time, but it was myself and then 3 data scientists that were doing experiments on a local machine and their Jupyter notebook. And I had to go from that experiment to a product that can be used by thousands of merchants every day, that can score transactions and tell merchants whether the payments that we're processing might be fraudulent. That was a huge, huge challenge, because at Amazon, of course, I had what's so called, and everyone knows, AWS, so Amazon Web Services. Amazon had a huge infrastructure, resources, and money to do really whatever I had in mind. Checkout.com and most companies out there, not really, the reality is very different. So I'll keep it at a high level, and then I'm looking forward to the questions that are going to come from the audience and Thomas or Shaun. But there were 3 main obstacles that I faced there from building a product from scratch. The first one is that there were those data scientists running those experiments, but when you are working on a local machine on your Jupyter notebook, it's very different from having a product in production being used by so many merchants. So the first challenge was making sure that from an idea, I could go to something that could be used in real time. And to do that, I had to create a machine learning engineering team. So I realized that, yes, data scientists could do their experiments, but I had to find the right talent to bring data scientists' dreams into reality. So I built a machine learning engineering team from scratch, which is also easier said than done, because there are not many out there, and the ones that are out there are usually hired and paid much more by big tech around. And then another thing that I had to make sure is that we had the right infrastructure in place. Again, easier said than done, because when you're building a product that's been used by many merchants in each day, you cannot have, once it's out, your model is out, you cannot have downtime. You have to make sure that the product keeps working on each day. You have bells and whistles in place if something goes wrong. And in this case, I also had to build a user interface for that, so that merchants can select the risk appetite and then process transactions. The third challenge, I would say, we are in 2024, so it's top of mind for me, being a woman in tech, it was also hiring diverse talent. It's been extremely hard with recruitment to do that, but I somehow managed at checkout.com to have 50-50 gender representation within my team. And I can see Q&As. Some questions. I'm working as a product owner in a regulated environment. AI is scary from my employer. Where should I start? So maybe let's take that one. What do you think, Shaun?
Yeah, I mean, checkout.com, it's payments, right? So it's regulated.
Absolutely.
So we don't have the get out of jail card free of, I mean, you have worked in a regulated environment. Not sure if this person is asking from a fintech or a pharma or whatever point of view, but yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say?
So definitely, especially with the EU AI Act, we have to make sure that AI is explainable, meaning that if a decision is made by a model, you can go backwards and understand the steps that happen there. So regulation, of course, needs to be kept in mind. I'm guessing that if you're working in a regulated environment, you also would have a legal team and someone that can help you through that. But for me, machine learning is all about return on investment. So if your employer is scared about using AI for whatever you're doing, I'm hoping that you would have a data scientist or an analyst to do this analysis for you. But what are you doing today that you can scale and do much faster, much quicker with machine learning? So I would say, make the comparison. This is where we are today. This is where we can get. And this is the investment I would need, but that's the return I would get if I would automate this process with machine learning. So it starts from owning what is the problem you're trying to solve and why do you need machine learning? And if you do, what's the return on investment on that? So
kind of sensing just underneath your comments
sure.
is turn it into dollars, pounds, euros, cents, right? Like it's natural for people who don't understand AI to be scared by it. Yeah, you can do a lot to reduce fear, and maybe that's good enough for helping the adoption of AI co-pilots and this sort of low-level AI for everyone. But if we're talking about AI features in a product to generate 10% more incremental revenue, until you put it like that, right? What's their incentive to get over that level of fear? But as you said rightly, I think you shouldn't overestimate how many resources you need to do that, right? So it sounds like in some cases you've taken 1 or 2 resources to estimate that ROI. Is that right?
Correct. And it can be as simple as that. It's something that I have to do constantly, actually, as a product manager within data. Let's say I want to invest in a new database because I think it's going to help feature engineering and doing stuff for my machine learning engineering team. No one is going to write me a check just like that. I have to prove that this is going to work. And again, I can talk high level without saying the company, but to invest in a new database, I did take 3 weeks' time of a data scientist to prove if we buy this database and we would have stuff done in real time, what would be the gain? So it was an investment of one data scientist full-time doing this research, but then the results were really promising. I wrote my document showing, okay, this is how much we could get, translated in a dollar amount, and at that point, the check was signed. Again, the process is long, was research involved. There was time for me invested to make these technical concept digestible for leadership, because I think as you grow in your careers as data product managers, one of the biggest challenges is that you might understand everything that's going on underneath, but translating that for your leadership team, it's a whole other kind of worms. But that for me worked. And in this case, the database example, the check was signed. So
relative to other product managers that you know working on, I don't know, more conventional, for want of a better word, products, that sounds like a bit of an extra skill that product managers in the data and AI space have to have. Like, I don't imagine a product manager for a mobile app has to make a business case to get the technology to ship mobile apps, but there's something here, isn't there, about the way data products are built, and then how bleeding edge some of the tech is, right? That maybe some product managers hearing that they have to make the case for new technology are freaking out. But it does sound like it's part of the job of being a good data and AI PM is you have to understand the technology at some level, because you're going to have to make this case over and over to stay on the leading edge. I guess that brings us to the next
Yeah,
step. That's
actually,
good.
that's a very good point. And then, of course, we can go into versus build versus buy conversation, but it's a nice natural progression into why I put multiverse there. So during COVID, and during my time at Checkout, I was offered the opportunity to go on a advanced data apprenticeship. I had nothing to do. It was COVID. So what did I do? I went back to studying. So the apprenticeship lasted a year and a half. I had to conclude it within 1 year, because then I decided to move out of checkout.com. But I just really wanted to get closer technically to my teams. I'm not saying that everyone that is a data PM has to do that, but I just really wanted to get firsthand a bit more technical and closer to my teams. So what I did was learning how to better query the warehouse, so better SQL, but also learning Python from scratch and building my own small machine learning model for risk detection. As I mentioned, it definitely got me closer to my teams, because I understood firsthand how hard it is to build from scratch models for risk mitigation, because being in the space, of course, thankfully, you have tons of transactions that are genuine and just a small amount that are fraudulent. In kind of technical terms, it's a very unbalanced data problem. So building small models that are nowhere near what my team does myself got me closer to the challenges that my teams are working on. So again, it's not something that you have to do, because it was enough for me sitting with my data science manager, engineering lead, understanding their day-to-day to drive the product, but it definitely helped. And it also made me much more autonomous as a PM, because if I need to get something and like understand an investment or just understand what happened with a few transactions, nowadays, I don't need to ask my analysts. I can just go myself into the warehouse, pull the data myself, and save everyone time and questions. So I really enjoyed that. It was hard because it was working and full-time studying, but it's an experience that I really like.
And just for people out there thinking about making that decision, I mean, on behalf of all data scientists and data tech people, thank you for doing that, because data scientists probably love it when their PMs come to them and say, can you just pull this data for me on blah, blah, blah. And so having a PM who cares enough to learn about how to do those things is pretty good. But for people thinking about, who kind of buy your business case for getting those skills, what technical skills, background did you come into that course with? Did you know any other programming languages already?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? If I knew other programming languages before joining?
Like, what kind of technical background did you have before you went on that multiverse course?
Yeah, not much. So I actually, like, my studies, were in cybercrime, so fraud, but again, more from a discipline rather than technical perspective. So I did not have much background. Again, I was lucky enough that I understood and learned how machine learning worked, being at Amazon, actually going from operations to then product. Machine learning was really on everyone's mouth. So I got closer to understanding what it was during my time there. And then Amazon is huge. I did learn a little bit of SQL when I was there, but nowhere near what I did then at Multiverse. And again, an apprenticeship is a way, but there's plenty of courses online for you to learn from.
And certainly in the UK, right? Apprenticeship for a apart from the tiniest companies, apprenticeship is something that your employer is already paying an apprenticeship levy. There are many providers. There's a lot of competition in this space, Multiverse and others. So and it's explicitly on the job training, right?
Exactly.
It's a very smart move. So just to be crystal clear for everyone, you did not have a computer science degree. You were not already a data analyst, and you still did this and got these skills. And now you're kind of a PM with these additional superpowers. Not that you didn't understand the domain, but now you understand enough of the technology to push things further.
Yeah, and I think it's our roles as PMs is much needed. And when people are going to be in PMs within the data and machine learning space, I always say, don't fall in love with the technology and the science. Mm-hmm. You are a PM, you have to have a goal in mind and a specific problem you're trying to solve. Technology and machine learning is simply an enabler. And I think this mindset is something that we have to keep in mind because it's really common, for example, for the scientists you work with to fall in love with the discipline, just keep experimenting forever until you have the perfect model that is working really well. So your role as a PM is to just question that. And, you know, let's keep in mind that we have a goal to reach, we have a product to build. So I think the two combined with a PM that knows a bit more about data is definitely been a great combo, at least for me.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Why don't we move on to the next step in your career? We've got some great questions coming in, but we'll leave them until we'll leave them until the end because they they were already on Tom and Mai's mind. So yeah, tell us about how that then led to you and created an opportunity for you at Trustly and what you do there.
Yeah, so Trustly, I really, again, I can talk about it, of course, just a high level, but I'm really loving my time here. I work for Trustly North America. Trustly works in open banking. And again, I was brought in to build and scale their risk offering. In this case, at Checkout.com, I had to build a product that was part of a bigger offering within the payment service provider business. For Trustly, actually, risk is at the forefront because at Trustly North America, we offer a guaranteed product. What this means is that merchants that usually operate in risky verticals like betting, traveling, come to us and pay us a little bit more, but then they just leave the risk to us, meaning that if there are returns, which is the equivalent of chargebacks in the card world, Trustly is responsible for those. So as you can imagine, it could be a really, really profitable business, but also can go very fast and very quickly into a huge disaster, because if you start approving too many transactions that are fraudulent, then you can really end up bankrupt here. And the only way to manage this trade-off is to do it with advanced machine learning. That's what I came to do. I think right now the product has been live for quite some time. The biggest challenge I'm facing is, again, I'm not AWS, making sure we have the right infrastructure in place. We have many models running in production. I think I actually posted some time ago what I actually do on a daily basis on LinkedIn, but many models going on in production. And I cannot stress enough how the infrastructure in this case for me is top of mind, because we must not forget that, okay, you have one model, 10 models, 100 models in production. You're not done with your job. The models that are in production, firstly, have to be available within milliseconds. No one wants to wait seconds before a transaction goes through. If anything goes wrong, you'd better fix it straight away because it's a service that impacts real life transactions. So I have to have monitoring and fallback capabilities in place. The models degrade over time. You know, it's humans change the way they want to defraud us. So those models, they better keep having that predictive power, which means you have to retrain your models at regular intervals and redeploy them at regular intervals. Sometimes you have to create new models and get them in production pretty quickly because there's a new product tag coming. So my challenge right now is having the right infrastructure in place and having it as automated as possible, because I don't want my teams to spend so much time retraining and redeploying models. I want it to be as automated as possible. So right now it's more of a challenge of how to scale Trustly and how to do it with the right infra and as automated as possible.
Yeah, it's a great intro to a question about buy versus build. You mentioned it earlier. So yeah, when you come to doing things at the scale of Trustly and you don't have, like most people don't have, the resources of Amazon.
Yeah.
There are some really hard choices that you have to make about what you buy versus what you build. And what's your framework? How do you think about that challenge?
Yeah, so again, it goes back to the problem you're trying to solve and what you're trying to do as a business. For example, checkout.com, they really made it clear they wanted a proprietary, I always mispronounce that, product because competition had their own fraud models. So they wanted to really invest into a product that was built in-house. Said that, it could have gone also another way. You could, like, instead of investing into making something in-house, which again, it's very expensive to do still machine learning in-house. Data scientists, machine learning engineers, DevOps, MLOps roles are expensive. Training capabilities and the infrastructure to run them on, it's very expensive. In that case, Checkout could have gone also the other way, for example, and just partnered with one of the machine learning providers for risks that are out there and could have gone into a revenue sharing model, let's say. So that was a possibility where, as a business, the leadership team decided, no, actually, we are ready to do this investment in-house. We don't want to partner with a service that already exists out there. So Trustly, of course, the whole product is centered around we manage the risk for our merchants. So in this case, it would make no sense to go somewhere else and partner with providers out there. But it goes back to, do we want to make this investment and build from scratch? Or maybe there are already providers out there that can do this for me and are gonna cost a cent compared to do everything in-house. So it really depends on the company direction, the problem you're trying to solve, and and what they're ready to invest.
So for anyone working in the fraud space, right, there's a whole host of providers. And what I'm hearing is that it depends where you want to position your product and your business. So as you say, Trustly taking on the financial risk is quite a weighty decision. And so outsourcing that decision to people who are not on the hook for the misprocessed payments wouldn't really add up on a balance sheet from a financial perspective. But if you were looking, for example, to do something in the fraud space, I guess now at Trustly, you offer a buy versus build dilemma and option to others, right? So if companies were looking to take slightly more risk on payment transactions, they could come to you, they could build their own thing. And so the most important thing I'm hearing is to understand where you want to be in the market based on especially based on what your competition is doing. Would that be fair?
That's fair. And also that's something that, throughout the years, it was a hard one to digest for leadership, is that, okay, we made an initial investment to build stuff in-house. But I think what sometimes leadership was forgetting is that it's an investment you have to keep making, and it's not cheap, because as volume grows, also your cost to run the infrastructure, training, and deploying models, it's going to also increase. So you'd better have a really sweet trade-off that, okay, we have the cost, but again, going back to the return of investment, it makes sense. And that's a hard one that I've faced in the past for leadership to digest.
I mean, these products are never finished, right? Like,
correct.
You can, if you have a product that has a web interface that has an app, like, yes, you keep updating it, adding features, but like once you've got an app, the investment cost, right, turning into a maintenance cost is drastically different. Is actually, in a way, the more successful an AI or ML powered product is, the more the maintenance costs might go up over time.
Yeah.
Especially in a space where you're trying to detect novel human behavior, right? In the fraud space, you can't turn off the models that detect the old behavior, otherwise people will keep trying those things. So, you know, but the API that your customers use to process the payments probably isn't evolving that much, and so I can see why that would be tough for leadership. One other thing, insert I can draw from what you said though, is about partnering. Is for those of you out there in the audience who are listening to Steph talk quite rightly about the cost of building and running this kind of stuff at scale, there is that option of partnering with others and sharing revenue, right? So if you have managed to do some experiments in a lightweight way, get a kind of business case, you can give your leadership multiple options. You can give them okay, we need to build it, and then running it, which is just as expensive as building it. But even now, and again, in 5 years' time, there's going to be a huge marketplace of people offering different kinds of models that do different kinds of things off the shelf. And so maybe for many people out there, outside the fintech space, right, where you have this very clear interest and way to quantify the uplift in your own proprietary models, for lots of other people, there are these off-the-shelf models and services that provide a much lower entry barrier. Yes, you have to share some revenue, but it's someone else's problem to keep that thing running.
Yeah, exactly. And what I foresee, and it's already happening so much in the risk space, as you said, is machine learning as a service. You can just plug it in and someone else is going to do it for you. It's also an option, and completely agree with what you said, Shaun. That's something that is just going to increase over time. Where for specific use cases you're looking for, probably there's going to be someone out there that it's already offering that as a service, and you can purchase that service.
Again, this is what PMs are for, right?
Exactly, to make these decisions and roadmap and have these discussions.
It's the same in any other software products, right? You can use your own brand new proprietary JavaScript framework, or you can use something that's out there. Depends what investment horizon, right, and the kinds of decisions, and especially that retention of the intellectual property, I imagine in the fraud space is very important. Tom, are you out there? We're halfway through. It's time to get you in this conversation.
Hi everyone. It's been very good presentation and already good discussion. So happy to join as a third voice here. So we've had one really good question in the Q&A panel. So one of our attendees is asking about the risks when we're using AI, and especially looking at the quality. I think that, this conversation goes back like every time we think about using AI. And I think that in the end, a lot of pressure will be put on the QA teams, quality assurance, but the development will be enhanced. But again, QA teams would also have this opportunity to use tools that can help them. What do you think about that, Steph?
So it goes back to the question that I'm seeing on the screen, right?
Yes.
For quality, yeah. So this is another one that, and it kind of like also ties back to this ChatGPT image that I shared. To build models, you need a lot of data, like really a huge quantity of data, and not only a good quantity, but good quality data. So whenever someone is starting to build their models, you have to make sure that you have the right quantity, but also the right quality of data. And that's the building blocks for anything machine learning. In this case, I'm reading about bias and privacy. Yes, this can happen also in risk, of course. I don't work in credit risk, for example, but you probably heard in the news in the past where there were models deciding for who to give credit or not. And if it was a woman coming from a particular postcode in the US, you were not given credit. But if it was a man applying, then they were given credit. So there were quite a few scandals in the past where models were biased, and it goes back to your training set. Again, doing this from scratch is hard, especially to understand where your models are biased, but it goes back to, especially, again, it depends in which business you operate. Healthcare, it's a huge one. Again, I don't have direct experience, but you have to go back to the data and the quality of your data to make sure that when you train the model, you can try and get rid of those bias. So it all starts from the data and its quality. So it's really important for, again, everyone trying to do this from scratch, that you look at your data first and ask yourself the question, am I ready to build a model? What are the possible implications I could have? And in my case, it was fairly easy, let's say, at checkout, especially because I had the ground truth. So Visa and MasterCard share with us the chargeback data. There's no way going wrong with that because it's already labeled and it's a transaction that's labeled as fraud. But if you're trying especially to build systems from scratch from credit or healthcare, you have to look at the data quality and quantity first and then take it from there.
Yeah, that's a really good priority. And also looking at the privacy implications, like, looking at even checking personal data for fraud detection. We can have this data on our own from some different parts of the system. We can also buy this or use a third-party tool. What's your experience with, keeping that data private and safe?
So in this case, I have, like, in every company I work with, actually, of course, risk, for example, has as an exception that if you're trying to manage and mitigate risk, then there's an exception that you actually can see PII data and build from there. But again, where the data is stored and kept, at Amazon, checkout.com, and even Trustly, there's an entire dedicated team that looks at privacy and making sure that, if you have to have access to certain type of data, it's very, very strictly regulated. And yeah, there are audits ongoing, of course, because we work in a regulated environment. But of course, you have to keep this in mind as you build your products. But I must say that in all the companies I work for, there are dedicated teams that are just looking to privacy and making sure we use data as it should and just for the purpose that we need it for.
Yeah, makes sense. We also have a new question from someone working at the government organization with government and tax information. So I'm not sure about the question. What is it about?
There was a scandal in the Netherlands recently.
Oh, okay.
Mispayment of benefits to people based on, let's say, some kind of algorithmic decision making, whether it was machine learning or AI, but it was computerized decision making led to a whole bunch of people who should have got sort of benefits not getting those. And the person, our attendee here, is asking, whose job is it to be critical and look honestly at that data? Is it the product manager, and who else?
Yeah, I would say so. At the end of the day, you as the product manager, you are the face of the product. So you're the ones that, in this case, it would be the one that would understand, okay, what happened here? Let's look at the root cause and do a very thorough root cause analysis and discuss this with your teams. So in this case, it sounds like a huge review would be needed, especially for the training data that was used there, and why the model then was biased towards one person versus the other. But it's definitely, I would say, product to just take ownership for this and then re-review and do a complete internal audit, let's say, with your teams. It's the role of the product manager. You are the face of the product. So it's definitely something that I would do in this case.
I think it's having worked in government, not in that country, but probably the product maturity. I'm I'm willing to bet a reasonable amount, backed by Trustly, of course, that that product was not really a product, right? Instead, it was more, there's an operational way of making decisions currently. How do we reduce the burden on human decision makers in that government agency of making that decision and reviewing cases? My guess is there is not a single product manager. There is not a face, certainly not now, of that product, which I think reinforces everything Steph has said about starting from the beginning with something simple, asking ourselves up front, do we want to do this? Can we do this reliably? And what are the implications if we get it wrong? Obviously, this kind of, as the EU AI Act works its way, at least through that jurisdiction, theoretically, some of these things should become harder for people to avoid doing. But what I always go back to is, like, there's a level of individual responsibility, right? When you are building an automated system that makes consequential decisions about other people's lives, there is a basic baseline empathy and responsibility that you have to feel with that. And I think that's, great PMs are the most important thing they can do, in my experience, is put themselves in the customer's shoes, right? And if the customer here is the recipient of benefits or any other consequential thing where you might be maybe not life or death, but not far off making those kinds of decisions, unless you can defend all your decisions from why you're doing it, through the selection of data, through selection of algorithms, explainability, as Steph mentioned, you probably don't have any business using these somewhat risky technologies for that kind of decision. And maybe the status quo is actually more defendable and safer. There's lots of things we can automate, but without, ultimately it's an individual, right, that misprograms something. It's an individual that makes a choice about which outliers to exclude, which turn out to be the outliers they shouldn't have excluded, because if they hadn't excluded them, the model would have learned something more useful and avoided a whole lot of risk. So there's probably a lot of blame to go around in that particular case. But if you're in that high risk setting, you've got to feel that individual responsibility. Yes, regulation will make your employer pay later on. Why do you want that? Like, feel responsible up front. And for me, that really comes through with the way you talk about it, Steph. Like, you own the successes and the mistakes of the predictions that you build.
Yeah, and that question, I mean, being a government agency, I wonder if they actually have ML or it's simple rules deciding, because again, there's not, unfortunately, a lot of investment going on in the government and tech, but it's a hard one. Like, even for companies like OpenAI, the bias, right? I'll give you a very funny example. Over the weekend, I was playing with Copilot Design with my husband, and we're just like typing prompts of someone, like some literally fruit, like a pear, a carrot, like running away from someone from Naples. No one in the prompt said a knife was involved, but the image that was spitted out was a person holding a knife and just chasing these carrots, broccoli, and pear, I think. Like, no one mentioned knife, but was the association the algorithm made of cutting fruit and someone from Naples, that there's criminality going on? I don't know, but even companies like OpenAI, they have all the resources and investment in the world, do it wrong. So we had a nice laugh, and I was like, yeah, definitely biased. Let's report that.
Yeah, it's a good call out that every product need a leader, and that leader needs to be responsible for everything around the product. And in Poland, we've had this situation where we've had one government application, and it broke at the first day of production, and it was meant to be used by the whole country. Some media did the investigation. We ended up with one intern doing the application. So I bet that probably there was no real product leader in this case. So yeah. It's a very good call out, Steph, that every product needs a leader, and the leader is responsible for everything in the end. Maybe it's not that person doing the job, but making sure that everyone around are doing their jobs. Yeah. And also to maybe wrap up after your presentation, we have another questions which are rooting into the same direction: how to deal with building product in our organization that is not perfect. So you've talked about leaving Amazon, joining checkout. You needed to build a team of specialists, also take care of infrastructure. Do you have like any golden rules for any people in the same situation? Like probably every situation would be different, but what tips can you give our audience?
Sorry, could you just repeat the question? I was reading the other one.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, like, to wrap up your presentation, what good tips do you have for people that are trying to build a product with AI in the organization that is not ready in one or any other areas?
Yeah, so actually this is a question that I ask when I interview data scientists. So I give them a business problem and then I say, how would you go about solving that? And the golden answer I'm looking for, so just tipping off a little bit, is a data scientist getting back to me and saying, the first thing I would do if it makes sense using AI, which I'm like, bravo, that's exactly what I was looking for. So AI and machine learning is not always the answer. Again, it goes back to what are we trying to do and what problem are we trying to solve. You don't necessarily need machine learning within your business. So that's the very first question you would need to ask yourself, do we actually need fancy models, or maybe there's another way to solve this problem? So that's where every business needs to start thinking about before embarking in an AI journey. And again, I ask this myself to data scientists, that their whole job is creating models, but if the answer is, I firstly need to look if it makes sense, maybe I don't have the data, maybe there's nothing, like there's no infra, like that's always a start. Like, do we actually need machine learning? And take it from there.
Yeah, makes sense. So whenever we decide that we need AI, we need machine learning because we've read an article as a product leader, do you have like any checklist of the things that we should check before implementation? Like we've talked about team, infrastructure, data, regulations. Regulations are also a big thing, like more than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned them, right? Like, and again, firstly, again, after, do we actually need machine learning? Do I have the money to build this from scratch, or can I go and buy the service is next? Are there vendors that can do this for me? And if the answer is yes, just go ahead and do some pricing analysis and go back to your leadership team. If the answer is we actually want this in-house, then there's the whole problem of do I have the right talent? I need someone not only to run experiments, I need machine learning engineer to put this in production. Do I have the right infrastructure? Do I have, like, keeping in mind, again, once the model is out, you need to retrain and redeploy regularly to keep it running. So there's actually a good book that I could suggest the audience. If you're building models from scratch, I sometimes call it the Bible, but do read Building Machine Learning Systems by Chip Huyen. She's fantastic and just gives you need to know already a little bit about machine learning and how it works, but her point of view and how she lays out how to build these models based on the actual problem you're trying to solve is fantastic. So a book that I would really recommend to anyone doing this from scratch.
Yeah, nice. That's a good guidance. And also going back to important topic that you've mentioned, do we really need AI? Can we also, talk a bit more, like, how to choose the best use case? Because probably everyone would have an idea based on enthusiasm about the new technologies. Yeah. AI is like, not everyone understands that it's just another wave of digital transformation, new technologies helping us in a better way than others. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, and that's why I concluded with the ChatGPT slide. Since ChatGPT came out, people now kind of understand what I do, which is a plus. Before it was hard to explain what what I do on a daily basis. But it also left us in such a hangover that everyone wants to jump on the AI and machine learning wagon. And sometimes it just makes no sense. So my suggestion is always go back to the problem you're trying to solve, and do you need machine learning and why? I really heard the most disparate things. A company now that is trying to provide feedback to employees via generative AI prompts. And I'm like, do you actually need that? And do you want to remove the one-to-one relationship with the manager delivering feedback to you? Do you really want a system to do that? And so that you can just say, great, we're using generative AI. So to me, in that case, it makes no sense, because, you know, in theory, I would love to still have my one-to-ones with my teams and discuss development. That's the crazy end of the spectrum, where this company just went ahead and like, we have to use generative AI, everyone is using it, let's go for it, and use it for a use case that, in my opinion, was not needed. So it's hard. It's a hard one to navigate right now with the so-called ChatGPT hangover, because right now you also see so many jobs and people with AI in their title. I question, like, are they actually doing AI? Are they simply using AI products? And the other side of the coin, of the medal, is that I sometimes go to, when I can, to these gatherings of machine learning scientists and data scientists and product managers in data. And it's crazy that even in the industry, there's people looking for specialists that have 5 or +5 years of generative AI experience. And the poor data scientists that I talk to, I'm like, dude, this did not exist until a few years ago. You cannot find someone with this experience for what you're trying to build. So right now, there's a lot of confusion. Everyone wants to jump on the wagon. So there needs to be a little bit more order. But on the other hand, yes, now people know what I do on a daily basis, which is great.
Yeah, it's great that we're getting back from this point, AI is magic, closer to earth, that it's actually a technology that can help us to solve some problems in quicker way. I think when we're preparing for this event, Shaun gave really good comment on, you know, how to choose your best use case, that your best ideas are already in the backlog. Is the sentence I would put in the golden frame and hang it in the office. I think that it's always good to treat new technology as a way of building things maybe quicker or in better way. So, you know, looking at your background, Steph, you know, can you also help to define how are you choosing AI as machine learning as the best way to deal with the stuff that you have in backlog, and when to choose other technologies, like, you know?
Yeah, so in my case, I always had to, like, as I mentioned, I was brought in to actually build these models from scratch. And the financial service, and especially risk, is one of the first industries that started using machine learning, because, of course, you cannot have someone reviewing transactions manually. Like, you need to scale that. So in this case, in my case, is an easy sell, so to say, that you can automate that, and machine learning is the way to go. Another maybe couple examples that come to mind is that in previous companies, what I also did was financial forecasting, for example, using machine learning. Again, very tied to a very specific problem, which was finance cannot predict how much roughly we're gonna make next month. And same was the gateway team. We cannot predict how many transactions we're gonna get in the next few months, which causes a problem, because I have to have engineers over the weekend working overtime. I have to pay for more infrastructure in case we have spikes, which is very costly. So that was another very tangible problem that, in this case, yes, it made sense to solve it with machine learning. So in that case, I created a forecasting model with my team. So finance knew how much roughly we're gonna gain month on month. but also the gateway team was able to free up resources and spend less in infrastructure. That's another very tangible use case that I've been doing in the companies that I work for. So again, super tangible to be solved. Another product that I started pitching but didn't have the chance to develop is, again, these are all problems where there's a ton of data. So if you are a huge merchant, a marketplace merchant, you sell so many things on your marketplace, then you will have customers that open a chargeback saying, I did not receive it, I don't like it, someone hacked my account. If you are such a big merchant, it becomes really hard to go and check each chargeback. So, and some chargebacks you'll never have a chance to win, some you would. And that's something that actually Stripe has started doing. What they do to merchants, and something I was looking at is, okay, I'm just gonna organize this for you, dear merchant, and give you a probability of which chargeback you should represent and you are going to win, and which ones actually it's not even worth your time. So again, another problem where there was so much data that could be used to build a product, and in that case, machine learning was the answer. So that's just examples of specific problems that can be solved at scale with machine learning.
Yeah, so it's always best to understand how do we do our stuff just to make sure which technology to use. And I think it's the right place to mention a book called Prediction Machines. So a book which is also bringing the AI and machine learning closer to the ground to watch how we can perceive this and how we can make those predictions with the data, right?
Yeah, and I mean, just to reiterate, as product managers, it's always, and this is a lesson coming from Amazon, start with your customer backwards. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Who are your customers? And then look into what can be done to solve it. Can be machine learning, can be something else. But as product managers, we do not have to forget that we are working for our customers, who they are, and what's the specific problem we're trying to solve for them. Technology then comes next. I think this is valid for every product role, whether it's in data or outside data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great advice.
Great words. Yeah.
And
so maybe last question for today from our friend Shanti. It's about doing an estimation of the investment. So I think it's a really good question how to keep your cost intact, especially with some, GPU nodes taking in a lot of dollars every minute. So what's your advice on that?
So, and like, I'll give you a cop-out answer. Like, it's in, if you're doing stuff from scratch, is in the hundreds of thousands to start with. It's something that I also, of course, try to ask ChatGPT, how much do you cost? So then the scale is different, but for example, large language models, they're definitely not profitable. But again, it goes back to Microsoft, Google. They have the money to be not profitable and just do things and experiment. I don't have that luxury. But from scratch, it's quite a big investment. So, and that's again, like simple spreadsheet, maybe you can start and just put down your costs, but it's not trivial. That's why sometimes if there's already the use case, it makes more sense to buy versus building from scratch.
Yeah, makes sense. It's always good to use something ready off the shelf at the beginning, not building the whole thing yourself, right? Yeah, makes sense. Thank you, Stefania. It was really good conversation with you today. So going back to you, Shaun, please close us off.
Yeah, thanks so much. So many good nuggets. Obviously, anyone who's tuned in, you can watch it back again on LinkedIn anytime. That video will be up soon. 18th of April, we're continuing this series. 2 topics that time. Managing AI product teams and deploying AI at scale. Yeah, 2 great speakers, Luciano and CJ from our previous event will join us again on the 18th of April. At DevOn, we also train product people in how to think about AI in their products. So if you're interested in learning how to start answering practically some of the questions Steph has posed and given her perspective on today, we are available to help. And you can reach out to Tom and I at the contact details there. Just remains to say thanks so much for your attention, for some great questions, and to Steph for sharing that very rich experience across so many logos and so much experience. On the one hand, finance, fintech is a place where some of this can be a little easier, but the costs of getting it wrong are so much higher than for many other places. So there's, I think, an incredible amount that we can learn from industries that have been doing this for such a much longer time. Thank you, Steph, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.